Well, why are there so few adoptions in Australia, particularly given that the number of children in out-of-home care across the country is going up and up all the time? Well, the federal government set up an inquiry to look into adoption in Australia, and in particular whether there are any unnecessary barriers to adoptions here in Australia. I spoke to the chair of the House of Representatives Standing Committee on Social Policy and Legal Affairs, the MP Julia Banks, about the inquiry and just what it is looking into.
Look, it is a state-by-state system, and indeed New South Wales has had some reforms which have made it certainly the best model within Australia from my perspective. But look, this inquiry is about consolidating the position of adoption in Australia, because fundamentally the issue is that we have very low adoption rates in Australia. In 2016 to 17, close to 48,000 Australian children were in out-of-home care, and we only had 315 adoptions. So that's roughly 9 children in 1,000 in the population. So if we compared that data to data, for example, in the UK, where they have an open adoption system, if we applied those numbers to the UK system, we should have had at the very least 5,000 adoptions in Australia. So this inquiry is basically, it's underpinned by us looking at the best, what's in the best interest of the child, rather than a number of child protection services on a state-by-state basis refer more strongly to the preservation of the family at all costs. So it's really looking at placement of children who are in out-of-home care. Of those stats, and this is another compelling statistic, of the 48,000, 31,000 of those children, or around 30,000 of those children, were in out-of-home care for 2 years. So this is really, and you couple that with the insurmountable challenges that prospective adoptive parents face, and we really believe that there is something to be addressed here, and we want to shine a light on this issue in Australia.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I wonder what you think from the outset, and I understand that this is exactly what the inquiry will be looking into, but what are these barriers to adoption then? If you, as you say, it would seem the vast majority, I think you said about 31,000 out of 48,000 or something, had been in longish term foster care over a couple of years. So what are the barriers to those children then being adopted? And I understand that family preservation, if possible, is at the heart of most states' child protection systems.
Yes. Well, I think one of the barriers is Australia's quite sad history, if you like, in relation to adoptions, you know, the forced adoptions of the 50s and 60s and the stolen generation. So there is probably a mindset barrier there in relation to preservation of the family at all costs. But, you know, there have been too many front-page articles, or indeed articles about children who have, you know, I heard about a case the other day of a child who'd been placed in, he's now an adult, but he'd had 70 placements during his life as a child. And, you know, 70 placements, 20 placements, you hear all these stories, and you couple that with the barriers to another barrier is many prospective adoptive parents just give up because it's just so intimate, it's so complex and over-involved, and there's subjective assessments. There's also subjective school of thought that it's better that children are aligned to a family that is aligned to their culture or their cultural history or their heritage. Well, the UK model has proven that fundamentally children need just two things, and that's love and stability.
I was just going to ask you about the UK model again, because as you mentioned, if we followed their system, then I think you said we'd have about 5,000 children adopted as opposed to just over 300 here in Australia. So that's a huge difference in approach.
Yeah.
Are there any complaints, criticisms, concerns about the way the system operates in the UK?
Well, I think basically the open adoption model or principle, if you like, the child maintains a biological connection with the family. But what open adoption seeks to do is that the rights of the prospective adoptive parents are also harnessed, so that they too have the comfort and security knowing that they're able to bring up that child and not have, the child taken away from them because there might be a change in the law or something like that. Rather, that child will have access, as will the biological parents during that time, but that the child grows up in a safe and loving environment.
Almost like a custody dispute, I suppose, where the child has a right to know both sets of parents, but the court will award primary custody to one as opposed to the other.
Yes, yeah, and because at the moment the rights of prospective adoptive parents, or indeed many foster parents, they can have brought up a child for seven or so years, or that child has been placed and then put back in biological family's environment and then comes back again. So it negates all of that, which can only be a good thing for the child. And that basic premise of acting in the best interest of the child is underpins everything about this inquiry. And this inquiry is really to give a voice not only to these children, it's basically to shine a light on these children. It's a statistic I don't think we in Australia can ignore any longer, and it's a matter for all governments to get together so that hopefully we can have a national framework which will be implemented across the country so that we can increase the number of children who are placed in a home with love and stability and permanency.
That is MP Julia Banks, and chair of the parliamentary committee that's looking into the rate of adoption and whether there are any barriers to adoption here in Australia at the moment. And if you would like to contribute to this inquiry, you can. They're taking submissions until Tuesday, the 15th of May this year. So you can just head online and look for the House of Representatives Standing Committee on Social Policy and Legal Affairs and find out how you can make a submission there.